The Galactic Empire, a vast interstellar civilization that spanned across thousands of star systems, had existed for millennia. Its power and influence were unrivaled, with species from countless worlds contributing to its ever-expanding dominance. The technology at the Empire's disposal was so advanced that it was considered godlike by all who witnessed it. For centuries, they had peacefully governed the galaxy, with no significant challenges to their rule. To them, Earth, a small and unremarkable planet in a distant corner of the universe, was nothing more than a primitive world inhabited by beings barely capable of space travel. The Empire had no reason to fear or even acknowledge such a planet. That was, until a single human ship, the Concorde, broke through the vast expanse of space and arrived at the Empire's borders. It was an event that would send ripples of shock through the entire galactic civilization. A simple message was transmitted from the ship, not one of fear or pleading, but a statement that would echo in the minds of every leader within the Empire. We are the humans. We come in peace, but we will not be conquered. The response from the Empire's leaders was one of incredulity. A council was hastily convened in the heart of the Empire's capital, where the message from the humans was laughed off as an oddity. How could a species so young, so insignificant in the grand scale of the galaxy, pose any threat? They were nothing more than a curious blip, a race that had just barely learned to leave their homeworld, let alone challenge the might of the Empire. Most of the leaders in the council chamber dismissed the message as a miscalculation, an anomaly, or perhaps even a trick played by one of the lesser species. But as the days passed, something began to stir within the Empire's ranks. The message, seemingly so simple and naive, started to take root in their minds. It was the tone, something that felt different from the countless messages the Empire had received over the years. It was a declaration, not of surrender, but of defiance. At first, it seemed absurd. The humans were still in the infancy of space exploration. Their ships were clunky and slow by galactic standards, their technology rudimentary at best. How could they even imagine standing up to the Empire? But as the days stretched into weeks, reports began to filter in from the Empire's outer territories. Small skirmishes, isolated incidents, none of which should have posed any challenge to the Empire, were occurring with disturbing regularity. Humanity, in the face of overwhelming odds, was striking back in ways that no one had expected. The reports told of human ships that are primitive, showing an unusual adaptability. Their tactics were unorthodox, often appearing reckless and illogical, yet they worked. Time and time again, human forces used their sheer will to overcome far superior opponents, turning what should have been easy victories for the Empire into costly defeats. What was most troubling was not their victories, it was their refusal to give up. The humans had been pushed to the brink, but instead of surrendering, they seemed to grow even more determined. Their technology may have been behind, their numbers may have been small, but their spirit, that was something the Empire had not accounted for. The more the Empire tried to crush them, the stronger the humans seemed to grow. They were relentless, and this new strength, this unwavering will, was something the Empire had never encountered before. A chilling thought began to take shape in the minds of the Empire's leaders. Perhaps the humans were not to be dismissed after all. The idea that they could be crushed quickly and easily was fading, replaced by an unsettling realization that these humans might just be the most dangerous species the Empire had ever faced. A feeling of unease spread throughout the high command. They had conquered entire civilizations with ease, but now they were facing something completely different. The Empire's advanced technology, its great fleets, and its long history of unchallenged dominance seemed to hold little weight against the raw, unyielding tenacity of humanity. There were whispers of fear within the Empire, and for the first time in centuries, the question was being asked: could the humans actually defeat them? The Empire, who had once thought Earth to be nothing more than a forgotten speck in the galaxy, was now grappling with the terrifying prospect that these seemingly simple creatures, these humans, might just bring down an empire that had stood for millennia. The Galactic Empire, once unchallenged in its dominance over the stars, decided it was time to wipe out the insignificant human race. They sent their most powerful fleet to Earth, expecting the invasion to be nothing more than a quick and easy victory. The Empire had conquered entire civilizations with overwhelming firepower, and the humans, with their primitive ships and unrefined technology, would be no different. But when the fleet entered Earth's atmosphere, they encountered something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. It wasn't just a fight, it was a battle of wills. The human forces, that are vastly outmatched in terms of technology, fought back with a ferocity the Empire had never seen before. Their ships were smaller, weaker, and slower, but they were agile. Humans didn't rely on conventional strategies. They didn't have the luxury of advanced weapons or shields, so they fought with desperation and creativity. Instead of charging head-on, as the Empire expected, they lured the Empire's ships into unpredictable, claustrophobic environments, using Earth's natural terrain and atmosphere as a weapon. They created illusions, traps, and ambushes that caught the Empire's experienced officers off guard. The human ships, though primitive in design, maneuvered with a terrifying efficiency, striking at weak points in the Empire's ships with pinpoint accuracy. What stunned the Empire the most was the humans' ability to adapt, to think on their feet. Each encounter seemed to reveal more about humanity's survival instincts. They didn't fight with the cold precision that other species employed. Instead, they fought with a kind of chaos, a calculated chaos that seemed illogical, but which worked time and time again. The human strategy wasn't about overwhelming force, it was about persistence and resourcefulness. They used every resource at their disposal, scrap parts, old technology, anything they could find to build weapons, defenses, and even to outsmart the Empire. While the Empire relied on its vast superiority, the humans used the environment to their advantage, striking in unexpected ways and forcing the Empire to waste time and resources responding to tactics they had never encountered before. What should have been a victory for the Empire quickly turned into a struggle for survival. The human resistance, against all odds, was holding its ground. As the battle raged on, the Empire's fleet was slowly being pushed back, its commanders unable to comprehend how such a technologically inferior species could cause them so much trouble. The humans' ships, though small, were crafted with a sharpness of purpose that made every maneuver feel like a well-aimed strike. And when the Empire attempted to bomb Earth's surface, the humans fought back with a vengeance, using their planet's own resources to shield their cities, to confuse enemy sensors, and to retaliate in ways that seemed almost unbelievable. What was most disorienting was the humans' unpredictability. Where other species might have buckled under pressure or tried to negotiate, the humans fought on relentlessly, showing no signs of fear or hesitation. They didn't back down. Even when their forces were clearly outnumbered and outgunned, they fought with an unyielding refusal to surrender. It was a quality that made them unpredictable, and unpredictability is something the Empire had never been forced to deal with before. Finally, after days of fierce fighting, the Empire's fleet, unable to defeat the humans and realizing that their victory would come at too high a cost, was forced to retreat. The humans had done the impossible. They had managed to send the Empire's mighty fleet scrambling back into the stars. The Empire could not explain how it had happened. There was no logical reason why the humans should have won, but they had. It was not through technology, not through firepower, but through pure, relentless determination. The message had been made clear. Humanity was not to be underestimated. The Empire, once sure of its dominance, now faced a new reality, one in which the smallest and most insignificant species on the farthest edges of the galaxy had the power to fight back. The word spread like wildfire across the Empire. Humans fight differently. Their unpredictability, their will to survive, and their refusal to give up would prove to be their greatest weapon. The Empire had never faced an enemy like this, and as the retreating fleet disappeared into the distance, the question on everyone's mind was not whether the humans would fall, it was whether the Empire could ever truly defeat them. By now, the Galactic Empire could no longer ignore the growing threat that humanity posed. The defeat of their mighty fleet had shaken the foundations of their belief in absolute superiority. For the first time in centuries, the Empire was facing an unknown that could not be easily contained or dismissed. Emperor Zhagoth, the ruler of the vast galactic expanse, understood the gravity of the situation. He issued a decree: humanity must be studied, understood, and neutralized before they could upset the delicate balance of the galaxy. To do this, he ordered the creation of a special task force, an elite group of spies and researchers selected from the best minds across the Empire. Their mission was clear: infiltrate Earth, study human behavior, and uncover the secret behind their unyielding spirit. The task force was equipped with the best surveillance technology, cloaked ships, and undercover agents prepared to penetrate Earth's defenses and uncover what made the humans tick. The task force landed on Earth, operating in the shadows, gathering information on every aspect of human life. They studied humanity's history, its cultures, its art, and its wars. The task force expected to find weakness, division, or fear, something that could be exploited. What they found instead was a profound shock. Humanity, despite its vast diversity, despite being divided into nations, religions, and countless different cultures, shared something extraordinary: a unity in the face of adversity. Throughout their history, humans have been divided by countless differences. Wars, ideologies, and conflicts had torn them apart for millennia. Yet, when faced with a common enemy, something remarkable happened. Humans, regardless of their differences, could unite. The task force's report revealed this truth with terrifying clarity. When the survival of their species was at stake, humans could put aside their divisions and fight together as one. This unity, unlike anything the Empire had ever witnessed, was what made humanity so dangerous. The more the task force learned, the more they realized that humanity's true strength lay not in its individual achievements, but in its ability to adapt, to come together, and to fight with a single purpose when the need arose. Other species, while powerful in their own ways, were often bogged down by politics, internal strife, or fear. But humans, time and time again, had proven they could rise above these obstacles, especially when faced with a common enemy. The task force watched as humans, who had no ancient alliances or treaties to fall back on, were able to quickly form coalitions, create new strategies, and share knowledge in ways that surpassed what even the most sophisticated systems of the Empire could have anticipated. It was as if, when the fight for survival began, the differences between them ceased to matter. This unity, however, was not something that could be easily manipulated. The Empire had often relied on sowing discord among their enemies, using division to weaken their resolve. But with humanity, it was different. They found that when pushed to the edge, when they had nothing left to lose, humans became an unstoppable force. The task force, observing humanity's resilience, began to understand just how deeply rooted their spirit was. There was no fear of death that could deter them. There was no challenge too great that they would not rise to meet it. And as the task force's reports flooded back to the Emperor, it became clear that this unbreakable spirit was humanity's greatest weapon. They didn't just fight for survival, they fought because they refused to be conquered, to be enslaved, or to be extinguished. As the task force continued to monitor the humans, the Empire realized they had made a critical error in underestimating them. What had seemed like a simple rebellious species was, in reality, a force unlike any the galaxy had ever known. The more the Empire learned about humanity, the more it feared what they could become. The humans had the ability to unite in ways no other species could, and this unity made them unpredictable. Their spirit, their resilience, their willingness to fight against all odds, these were things the Empire had never encountered in such a raw, unrefined form, and it terrified them. The Empire's leaders knew that if humanity's rise continued, it could destabilize the very order they had spent millennia building. They had no choice but to act, before it was too late. But even as the task force reported back, the one question that lingered in the minds of the Empire's leaders was simple: Could they stop the humans before they grew too powerful to defeat? The Galactic Empire had made a grave mistake in underestimating humanity's resilience. Rather than folding under the pressure of their superior technology, humans have found strength in adversity, and it soon became clear that the Empire's expectations were woefully inaccurate. What began as a defense of Earth had transformed into a revolution, one that spread like wildfire across the galaxy. It was not just humans fighting for survival anymore. As the Empire's oppression and cruelty became more apparent, oppressed species across the galaxy, those that had long been sidelined, enslaved, or treated as inferiors, began to rally to humanity's cause. These species, many of whom had been subjugated by the Empire for centuries, saw an opportunity to strike back, fueled not only by the desire for freedom, but by an intense hatred of the Empire's tyrannical rule. The humans, with their unrelenting will and ability to unite, quickly forged alliances with these oppressed species, creating a coalition that the Empire had never anticipated. This new alliance was a force unlike any other. It was unpredictable, powerful, and relentless. The Empire found itself facing a multifaceted uprising, one that spanned entire star systems, as these newly formed coalitions struck out against their oppressors. Humanity's adaptability was their greatest weapon, and it was spreading like an unstoppable virus throughout the galaxy. What had once been a series of small, isolated resistance cells on Earth quickly turned into a coordinated, widespread counteroffensive. Human tactics, born from a history of survival and conflict, combined with the desperation of the oppressed species, created a new kind of warfare. The Empire's fleets, once considered invincible, were now forced to deal with guerrilla tactics, sabotage, and surprise attacks in places they never expected. Humanity's alliances turned the tide of many battles. Where the Empire had once dominated, they now found themselves losing ground. No sooner had the Empire crushed one rebellion than another would rise in its place, each one fiercer, bolder, and more determined than the last. And with each new uprising, humans were always at the forefront, organizing, leading, and inspiring. Their ability to adapt, to outthink their enemies, was becoming the stuff of legend. The Empire's military elite, accustomed to fighting against less capable foes, found themselves baffled and frustrated by the unpredictability of human resistance. The Empire sent its most feared squads of assassins and bounty hunters to track down key human leaders, but every time they thought they had captured one, another would emerge. The human leaders, whether generals, scientists, or former civilians, seemed to be everywhere, slipping through the Empire's grasp, leaving behind only traces of their presence. They were like ghosts, always one step ahead of the Empire, always ready to turn the tide of battle in their favor. The Empire's attempts to crush the human leadership only made the rebellion stronger. The human leaders were inspiring figures, unafraid to sacrifice for their cause, and their resilience gave the people under their command the will to keep fighting, no matter the cost. What had started as a single world standing against an overwhelming enemy had now evolved into a galaxy-wide conflict. The Empire's once unquestioned power was crumbling under the weight of their own mistakes. Humanity was not simply fighting for survival anymore, they were fighting for something greater. They were fighting to take back control of their destiny, to liberate the oppressed, and to prove that even the most powerful empire could fall. And every time the Empire thought they had the upper hand, humanity would strike back, harder than before, using tactics the Empire could not predict. Their evolution was rapid and relentless. In the span of just a few months, the humans had turned from a species with no true military power to a force capable of challenging the very core of the Empire's control. The Empire's leaders could only watch as their carefully constructed world began to unravel. Humanity had become something they could no longer control, no longer predict. The question on every general's lips was simple: how long before this becomes an outright war they could no longer win? The Empire had been complacent, certain that their advanced technology and overwhelming numbers would crush the humans. But now, with each battle they lost, they realized just how wrong they had been. The humans were no longer just a threat. They were a new kind of enemy, one the Empire had never faced before. The rise of humanity, combined with the growing rebellion of the oppressed species, was something the Empire could no longer dismiss as a mere nuisance. The counteroffensive had begun, and this time, the Empire was on the defensive. The Galactic Empire, which had once seemed invincible, was now on the edge of collapse. Word of humanity's relentless resistance had spread like wildfire across the galaxy, and for the first time in centuries, the Empire's military superiority was being questioned. The resistance wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. And with each passing day, it seemed that humanity was learning, adapting, and growing stronger. The galaxy's most powerful alien leaders, shaken by these developments, were called to an emergency council meeting to discuss the escalating crisis. As they gathered in the heart of the Empire's capital, the weight of the situation bore heavily on their minds. The Empire's authority was being challenged in ways they had never anticipated, and no one was sure how to proceed. The once unthinkable idea of defeat was now a real possibility. It was a moment of unprecedented uncertainty, and the very foundation of the Empire seemed to be at risk. At the meeting, a high-ranking military advisor, the strategist Varek, stood before the council. Varek was known for his cold, analytical mind and his ability to predict the outcome of almost any battle. He had always been a voice of reason, trusted by the Empire's leadership. But today, his face was grim, and his words cut through the tension in the room like a blade. He began his report with a chilling statement. "We are no longer fighting a single species. We are fighting an evolving force. The humans, every time they fall, they rise again. Every defeat they suffer only makes them stronger." The council fell silent. It was a revelation that struck at the heart of their arrogance. The humans, in their unpredictability, had become an enemy that the Empire could not easily understand, let alone defeat. Varek continued, his voice steady but filled with undeniable concern. "They are learning from their mistakes at a pace faster than any other species. Every setback, every loss, is turned into an opportunity. Where we expect them to falter, they adapt and strike harder." Varek's words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of truth. The Empire, with all its advanced technology, its vast fleets, and its centuries of military dominance, had never faced anything like this before. The humans didn't just recover from their defeats, they innovated. They learned, not only from their victories but from their losses. They had developed new strategies, new weapons, and new tactics at an astonishing rate, faster than the Empire could keep up. And now, with their newfound allies, species from the fringes of the Empire who had long been oppressed and marginalized, they were starting to strike at the very heart of the Empire itself. The Empire, so sure of its superiority, was now fighting a war on multiple fronts, and it was losing. The walls that had once protected the Empire's power were crumbling, and humanity was at the forefront of this upheaval. Varek, once a symbol of confidence and control, now spoke with an unmistakable tone of dread. "We cannot break them. We cannot even predict them anymore. Their ability to adapt, to fight back after every loss, has made them unpredictable in ways that we never considered. The very thing we thought would be their downfall, their lack of unity, their disorganization, has become their greatest strength. They are resilient, and they are growing stronger every day." The Empire's military might is failing against them. The room was still, each leader processing the weight of Varek's words. There was a collective sense of helplessness that permeated the chamber. This was not a threat that could be crushed with a few well-placed strikes. This was not a war that could be won through overwhelming firepower or sheer numbers. Humanity had become something else, something unpredictable, something the Empire could not comprehend. Varek paused for a moment, then delivered his final piece of advice, his voice low and filled with grim finality. "The only advice I can give you is to run." The words echoed throughout the room. For the first time in the history of the Empire, a military strategist had told the council to retreat, to abandon their fight. It was an admission of defeat, a recognition that they were no longer in control. the galaxy's greatest empire, built on centuries of conquest and dominance, was now faced with the horrifying truth: they could lose. Varek's warning was clear. Humanity had become too powerful to ignore, too unpredictable to defeat. The question that lingered in the minds of the Empire's leaders was simple yet terrifying. If they could no longer win, what was left for them? The Empire, once untouchable, now stood on the precipice of destruction, and the humans, against all odds, were the ones who had led them there. The tides of war had shifted irreversibly. Humanity, once thought to be a primitive species, had now become an unstoppable force. What began as a desperate, ragtag resistance, fueled by a deep desire for survival and freedom, had grown into a full-scale military campaign. As the human resistance movements expanded across the galaxy, their technology advanced at an unprecedented rate. In the early days, humanity's ships had been nothing more than crude, makeshift vessels, pieced together from salvaged scraps. But now, thanks to the technology they had seized from the Empire and their growing alliance with oppressed species, they had developed sophisticated fleets of their own. These new ships were formidable, and their weaponry was just as advanced as that of the Empire itself. Humanity's engineers and scientists had adapted quickly, reversing and improving the technology they had stolen, turning it into weapons of incredible power. What had once been an underdog struggle had now transformed into a coordinated and highly effective military force. The human resistance was no longer simply fighting to survive. It was now fighting to destroy the empire that had sought to crush them. The final battle, the one that would determine the fate of the galaxy, took place at the very heart of the Galactic Empire. The human forces, now bolstered by their allies, gathered for a full-scale assault on the Empire's capital, a massive fortress world that had once been thought invulnerable. The Empire, battered from years of continuous warfare, had stretched its resources thin, but in an attempt to hold onto its crumbling power, it threw everything it had left into the defense of its core systems. The Emperor, once a symbol of unchallenged might, commanded the Empire's elite forces to stand firm. He believed that if the capital fell, the Empire would be lost forever, and he was determined to stop the humans at any cost. Yet, despite all their efforts, the Empire's defenses were no match for the relentless, adaptive tactics of humanity. Time and again, the human fleets struck with precision, using strategies that seemed impossible, creating distractions, false retreats, and ambushes that disoriented the Empire's forces. Each battle felt like a devastating blow to the heart of the Empire, and with each victory, humanity's resolve grew even stronger. As the battle raged on, the humans' ingenuity became even more apparent. Their ships moved with unmatched fluidity, always outmaneuvering their opponents, using the terrain of the capital system itself to their advantage. They deployed technology they had barely understood months before, now fully integrated and wielded with deadly effectiveness. What had once been a weakness, their lack of experience in large-scale space warfare, had turned into an advantage. Humanity's ability to adapt and evolve in the face of overwhelming odds had reached its zenith. Every setback was a lesson learned. Every loss was an opportunity for improvement. The Empire's forces, once the most feared in the galaxy, now found themselves scrambling, overwhelmed by an enemy that seemed to know their every move. As the battle drew to a climax, the Emperor, standing in his Imperial Command Center, watched in disbelief as the last of his defenses crumbled. His empire, which had ruled for millennia, was disintegrating before his eyes. The human forces had breached the capital's outer defenses, and the Emperor could do nothing to stop them. With the last of the Empire's warships destroyed, and the human forces closing in on the central command hub, the Emperor was forced to make the unthinkable decision: retreat. In that moment, the once invincible Emperor of the Galactic Empire abandoned his throne and fled into the darkness, leaving behind a legacy of tyranny in ruins. The humans, led by their indomitable spirit and unwavering will, had done the impossible. They had crushed the Empire at its very core. The consequences of this victory were profound. The Empire, in its final days, had underestimated humanity's ability to resist, to adapt, and to overcome. It had believed that its superiority would never be challenged, that its military power would forever keep it in control of the galaxy. But now the tables had turned. The once mighty empire was in chaos, its leadership scattered, and its infrastructure in shambles. The humans had not just won a battle, they had shattered the very foundations of the empire itself. The galaxy, once under the empire's iron grip, now found itself at a crossroads. Humanity's triumph had proven that no empire, no matter how powerful, could last forever. And as the smoke cleared and the last remnants of the empire's military power crumbled, the humans knew that they had not just defeated an enemy, they had created a new future, one where they would no longer be oppressed, one where they would forge their own path among the stars. In the wake of the war that had torn the Galactic Empire apart, the galaxy found itself standing on the precipice of a new era. The once mighty empire, which had reigned over countless star systems for millennia, was now a shadow of its former self. It had been irrevocably shaken by humanity's unexpected rise, and in the aftermath, it was clear that the empire would have to undergo a deep and painful restructuring. Some species, those who had long been subjugated by the empire, were quick to extend offers of peace to humanity, eager to establish new alliances and begin rebuilding together. Yet, there were others, richer, more powerful species, who saw the rise of humanity not as an opportunity, but as a direct threat to their own positions. To them, the very idea of humans being able to defeat the empire was an affront to their superiority. The galaxy had never seen anything like humanity's tenacity and cunning, and it was this newfound strength that left some species nervous about their place in the new order. But despite the divisions and the tension that gripped the galaxy, one thing was indisputable: humanity had earned its place among the stars. No longer were they seen as a primitive species, struggling to survive on a backwater planet. They had done the unimaginable. They had faced down the greatest military force in the galaxy and emerged victorious. Their ships, their soldiers, and their leaders had fought with an intensity that the Empire could not have anticipated. And in doing so, humanity had proven that they were not only capable of surviving, but of thriving in the face of adversity. The galaxy now viewed humanity through a new lens, as a species that could no longer be ignored or underestimated. The reputation they had earned was not one of mere survival, but of relentless resilience, tactical brilliance, and a deep, unyielding will to survive. Across the galaxy, the message echoed loud and clear: never underestimate the humans. As the Empire began its long, slow recovery, the consequences of humanity's triumph could still be felt everywhere. The old power structures were shifting, and some species were beginning to reconsider their stance on the humans. There was no going back to the old ways, no return to the status quo. Humanity's victory had irrevocably changed the balance of power in the galaxy. However, as the Empire tried to regain its footing, whispers and rumors began to spread across the stars. Some spoke of humanity's next move, how, with their victory now behind them, they were no longer confined to the world they had once called home. Humanity had begun exploring the galaxy beyond their own star system. They were venturing into uncharted space, uncovering new worlds, and forging new relationships with other species. Some feared this new chapter in humanity's history, while others saw it as an opportunity to collaborate, to work with the humans rather than against them. What was certain, however, was that the galaxy could no longer afford to view humanity as just another fledgling species struggling to find its place in the universe. Humanity had proven itself on the battlefield, but more than that, they had shown the galaxy that their spirit could not be broken. Even in the darkest of times, when all seemed lost, humanity had found a way to adapt and overcome. And now, with the dust settling and the galaxy still reeling from the war, it was clear that humanity was preparing for a new chapter, one where their influence and power would only continue to grow. The ancient civilizations that once ruled the galaxy had long since passed, leaving behind only remnants of their once great empires. But now a new power was on the rise. The universe, once dominated by older, more established forces, had learned a hard lesson. Humans were not to be dismissed. They had earned their place at the table, and now they were preparing to write the next chapter in galactic history. It was a chapter that would be filled with new discoveries, new challenges, and new alliances. Humanity's story, which had begun in the quiet corners of a distant star system, was far from over. And as the first human ships ventured deeper into the stars, leaving the remnants of their battle with the Empire behind, they knew that this was only the beginning. They had fought for their freedom, for their place in the galaxy, and they had won. But now the future stretched out before them, vast and uncertain, waiting for them to carve out their destiny. The universe had watched as humanity had fought against impossible odds, and now it would watch as humanity set its sights on the stars. It was a new era, one shaped by the humans' incredible legacy, a legacy that would echo through the galaxy for generations to come.